Well, it felt like one of the longest and most chaotic college football seasons in recent memory is now finally in the books. Indiana might have closed the chapter on a wild calendar, but the story is far from over. From the college football playoff expansion to major questions about what comes next with NIL, the future of the sport is still very much in the air. So joining me now to look ahead, our front office sports reporter David Rumsey and editor-in-chief Dan Roberts. Dan, let's start with you. The Big Ten is now crowned champion 3 years in a row. How do you sort of think the Big Ten now compares to all these other conferences like the SEC, which I feel like it's always compared to?
Yeah, it does feel to me like it's the SEC, Big 12, and Big 10, and then there's everyone else, right? And that was already the case for a few seasons now. But SEC dominance has faded. And you could say that it's due to the new era of NIL, the transfer portal loosening, conference realignment a little bit, but certainly not just from the last 3 years, but I think we're seeing a lot more parity in college football. And I don't think it's a stretch, and this is more just anecdotal, but you could put that along with the trend of college football getting much more popular nationwide. I mean, what's the number 2 sport in America now? It goes NFL and then college football. And I think that's a newer phenomenon. The ratings reflect it. Certainly ESPN has seen it with game day. It's all kind of happening at once. And I think that opening the floodgates to not just allowing players to get NIL dollars, but also maybe the revenue sharing is ushering in this new era of parity. Any school, Indiana, which was never good enough, can suddenly make it all the way to the end if they play the various options on the table in exactly the right way. So I think it's very exciting. But as you said, there are a number of questions, and I know David has a story up about that today.
Yeah, David, let's get into that. What do you think? Is the Big Ten essentially now the champs here?
Yeah, 3 years in a row after, remember, a 4-year streak for the SEC. And I think bigger than just Big Ten versus SEC, Indiana is the first-time college football champion, national champion, since I believe Florida in the 1990s, they said on the ESPN broadcast on Monday night. That's the big part to me. Anybody can do this now, like Dan was saying. Yes, it's Big Ten and the SEC, and that's where a lot of the money and the history is and probably still will be. But we see Texas Tech in the Big 12, what they're doing. Can there be another team emerge in the ACC or the Big 12 to compete with the Big 10 and SEC? Maybe it's not just the Power 2 like we thought it was going to be. Maybe all of these Power 4 programs and maybe even another program can find a billionaire donor like our Amanda Kristovich has been writing about and propel themselves to the top of the sport.
And by the way, guys, I know I have some biases here because of my wife's family, as you guys know, but Vanderbilt is another example of this trend, right? I mean, a school that was always called the doormat of the SEC because they're the Commodores. And suddenly this year they have the number 2 Heisman finalist and very nearly made the playoff. There was even a little bit of controversy, and people thought maybe they should have been in over one or both of those group of 5 schools, along with Texas, along with Notre Dame. So you're going to continue to have kind of hemming and hawing over the structure of the playoff. We can talk about whether they expand, but I do think that there are a number of examples you can point to. David mentions Texas Tech that prove that we're in a new era where it's not just going to always be Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State.
David, I want to get into the conversation about how long this feels like this season is gone. It feels like the college football playoff was played later than it ever has. And next year, it's going to be played on January the 25th in Vegas. That is the longest period of time between when we started bowl season to when it ends. I mean, is that going to be basically on the horizon for the rest of the college football calendar for the foreseeable future?
Baker, there's some intricacies happening with just the calendar and the sporting calendars in general over the next 3 years. So yes, we're moving from the 3rd Monday of January to the 4th Monday of January, so off MLK Day weekend for the next 3 years. Then we're going to go back to that 3rd Monday in January in 2030 for that national championship game. But this is all, of course, if we only have 4 rounds of playoff games. We've been talking about expansion to 16 teams and maybe even to 24 teams, which could make it even longer. Is college football going to drag into February like the NFL? I don't really see that happening. I think they would be able to find a way to kind of squeeze it back into January. So much of college football postseason is just the pageantry that we were used to seeing on New Year's Day, which obviously is several weeks ago at this point. But I personally think if we could get closer back to New Year's Day and that holiday time for the end of the college football playoff, or at least those semifinals, that would feel a lot better. And I think people would be a little bit more interested.
I do think, by the way, guys, that it currently already runs too late. And maybe this is a result of expanding to 12. By the way, we've only gotten 2 seasons of the 12 before we're talking about already expanding to 16. But there's a crowded schedule here in the fall with all sports, right? I mean, everyone faces this. Unrivaled was running games opposite NFL playoff games. There's just not that many windows to run your games. But I do think, as David said, shrink down that amount of time between the semis and the final. Maybe that's part of it. And look, although we saw an overall lift for college football ratings this year, as I mentioned, the semis were down significantly after that huge Rose Bowl between IU and Bama. And you could point to the schools that were in it. You could point to a number of things. But I think part of it might have just been that it's getting too late. It's getting too deep into January, and you're facing off against too many competing sports.
David, let's talk about expansion here, because if there is going to be more teams added to the CFP, it has to happen within the next couple days, because ESPN has given the commissioners up until the 23rd of January to make a decision on if they're going to expand potentially to 16, which is what the SEC and other conferences want, or even 24 teams, which the Big Ten wants. Do you foresee expansion actually happening? Do you think they get a deal done this week? And what number do you think we expand to?
I do think it's going to happen. I do think it's still going to happen this week, although it's looking less and less likely as we get closer to that deadline, which, by the way, was pushed back from December 1st, but they couldn't make up their mind. And as we've been talking about for months now, it's really been this different opinions from the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big Ten wants to go to 24 teams, or at least have some more automatic qualifying bids, whereas the SEC really likes 16 teams, and that kind of, using the selection committee that we have now, just a few automatic bids and then a lot of at-large bids. So can they figure out something for this year? Maybe it's just a one-year solution to get to 16. Maybe the Big Ten says, hey, can we get to 24 in a couple years down the road? I do think we figure out a solution. If not this year, by next year, because they just see too much money in expanding.
Well, Dan, I want to get your thoughts on that too, but I also want to add in, what do the group of five schools, what role do they play in all of this, given the fact that there was a lot of criticism about Boise State the year prior, James Madison and Tulane, should they have been in it this year? And of course, that caused controversy with Notre Dame and Miami. So what do you think we expand to if we do, and what role do you think the group of five schools play in that?
Well, on one hand, I think you look at this year's bracket, and it's very easy to say there shouldn't be a group of five schools in this thing, enough of that. And everyone likes to point to Tulane and JMU this year and say, wouldn't Notre Dame, Texas, Vandy all fare better than those two schools did? Now, on the other hand, James Madison scored like 30-something points in their game. I remember seeing a stat that among all the first and second round games, they scored the most points of anyone who lost. And so, arguably they held their own, although they lost by a significant margin. I think what's going to have to happen is, let's see where the new Pac-12, which I think will be it's more like the Pac-8 or Pac-9. Let's see where that conference goes in the next 2 years, because do we return to saying Power 5? Remember, it was only a couple years ago, it was the Power 5. Now we're down to the Power 4. Can that conference become a power? David's shaking his head. At first, it'll certainly be non-power. So now is it going to go back to group of 6, I guess, from group of 5? So that's sort of a wrench in the system, is the Pac-2 returning to, I wouldn't say its former glory, but the rebirth of the Pac-12. And then, you have to decide whether you change the rules on that automatic qualifying, the buys for the top 4 ranking conference champions. That caused a ton of chaos this year, because the ACC, Miami was the top ranked ACC school all along, but because they lost 2 games to fellow ACC opponents, they weren't even in the ACC conference championship. And something's kind of awkward about that, right? I mean, the ACC champion was 7-5 Duke, which didn't even make the playoff. So I think they see some of the major flaws with the current system. I think whether or not they expand, you're going to see changes for next year.
Before we end this convo, guys, I'm curious, David, let's start with you. What do you think is going to be the storyline that you're going to be watching for the offseason as we head into the offseason for the next college football season?
I do think we're going to continue to watch the portal and the impact that it's having. And obviously, we don't really know anything at the beginning of the season, because we thought Texas and Penn State was ranked number 1 and 2 this year. And Texas kind of fought their way back, but Penn State fired their coach that was in the college football playoffs semifinal the year before. So, very early betting odds show Indiana, Ohio State, Texas, Oregon among the favorites to win again next year. But who's going to be the surprise story? Who has a huge portal class, maybe a nice recruiting class, like we've been talking about? Who has the funding coming in that we don't see, that can come out of the middle pack of the Big Ten or the SEC or even another conference that we're not expecting? who can be that team this year? And I think a lot of people are going to be trying to predict that over the summer.
Dan, what about you?
Well, David said there, who's going to be the school with the funding that we don't see? And there's a real key there in that phrase, that we don't see. All this stuff is still kind of happening, I don't want to say in the dark, but it's not necessarily out in the open. No one knows for sure the exact NIL budget and payroll of every school. Now you can FOIA for some of it, but that takes time. So will the schools that were good this year automatically be as good next year, right? That's A. B, there's going to be at least one, if not multiple schools that we're not thinking of right now who come out of the woodwork. And that was Vandy and Indiana this season. So to get back to my earlier point about the new parity that I see in college football, it means there's going to be someone really good next season who currently we're not talking about.
Dan Roberts, our editor-in-chief, and Front Office Sports reporter David Rumsey. Guys, thank you so very much. And stay with Front Office Sports for more on the business and culture of sports.